Well, welcome everybody. I know that other people will be coming, but thank you to those of you who have made it here on time. We're so glad that you are here. There are some critical conversations that Woman Preach try to have regularly, and this one on what it means to be preachers as we take care of communities that suffer or that deal with, live with HIV and AIDS. Not that those two things are the same, but I just want to say thank you for being with us because I think it's important for us to figure out a rhythm of care as well as a way to do this work and to preach about it so that we are faithful to what God is calling us to do for all creation and for all of our kinfolk. So welcome and thank you for coming. It is my pleasure to bring to this conversation Bishop Tanya Rawls, who is a friend. I'm glad to say I know her from the Board of Bishops and Faith Leaders through the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries. She has been such a good friend and supporter. She has been an LGBTQ faith leader and social justice activist for many years. She is a graduate of Duke University. Um, she later, when she was living, she took a gap year before she went into law school, landed a job at an account executive at a large advertising agency in Los Angeles. That was where she fell in love with and found home with her partner and a local lesbian community. She also was a very active member of West Angeles Church of God in Christ. As she became more involved and committed in her church life, she became a licensed evangelist missionary, which was the highest position that you could hold in the Church of God in Christ. And then she left her relationship because she was led to believe that God could not love her or use her if she was same gender loving. She moved back to New Jersey, where she was born shortly after um, that, and started working with an ad agency there. And a whole lot of stuff about that. When she moved back east, she became active at the United Free Will Baptist Church, where she was later ordained as a minister. She felt called to preach, but held down because, again, she was in relationship with a woman. She wasn't sure that she could be a minister and a lesbian. And for that reason, she chose not to advance, or felt like she wasn't ready. But then she went to the Unity Fellowship Church, New York City, where she heard God, gay, and good in the same sentence for the first time in her life. And she felt home and could finally bring her whole self to church. So she has done a lot of work around real estate, uh, thousands of businesses across the US, the Caribbean, Africa, and other parts of the diaspora, merchandising work. She's just been a businesswoman. Um, she became active in the Unity Fellowship Church, more active in when she moved to DC, and became and was ordained a reverend there, and served as assistant pastor of Inner Light Unity Fellowship Church under Bishop Rainey Cheeks. In 2000, Archbishop Carl Bean commissioned her to start a new church in the South. She moved to Charlotte, South Carolina with her partner Gwendolyn. May Gwendolyn rest. Together they founded Unity Fellowship Charlotte. The congregation grew, and driving back and forth more than 3 hours each way just to have safe space to worship. It's what she was doing. And she was ultimately consecrated as one of the first woman bishops in the Unity Fellowship history. Um, I'm not going to read all of this because I want her to have time. She's been involved in Moral Monday movement with Reverend Dr. Bishop William Barber there. She was um, the architect of the Freedom Center for Social Justice Do No Harm campaign, looking for equal protection for LGBTQI citizens. She has moved. She felt called to move from Unity Fellowship to the United Church of Christ, where she formed Sacred Souls UCC. And in addition, she's a co-founder of the Charlotte Clergy Coalition for Justice and the National Trans Religious Cohort, which provides training and support to trans and gender variant seminary and religious studies students. Um, she became a part of the founding of the Black Mountain School of Theology and Community, established a training community to train community activists and seminary students together so that they could matriculate more prepared for the changing landscape of ministry in the U.S. She has been a reviewer for the Journal of African American Studies, published in Black Sexualities, Sojourner's Sage, and other printed and electronic publications. She has been guest speaker and consultant for the NAACP, PFLAG, and leadership teams in various and sundry other places. I mentioned TFAM. She is an amazing leader in every way you could say leader. Please help me welcome now Bishop Tanya Rawls. Thanks for
Hello, everybody.
the stage is yours.
Well, thank you so much, Reverend Valerie. And yes, our friendship is beyond just friendship. She is my sister, and I'm so grateful for all that we have had an opportunity to do together. I also really want to thank Woman Preach for this invitation. It is a entity that has a lot of the sisters who I have considered mentors without them even knowing they were mentoring me, and others who have played such a vital role. And I'm also grateful for everyone who's here today with us, particularly as we think about this Giving Tuesday, but also this time of us thinking about HIV and AIDS and the ways that it has impacted our community. I'm going to switch to my documents. So if you can't see me, if somebody can just let me know. But I think you all should still be able to see me. Reverend Valerie, can you all see me okay?
We can see you.
Perfect. All right. Um, so in addition to being humbled by this invitation, I also count it timely and think it not strange that it would come at this time as I've been personally grappling with so many of the things that are going on in our world today, and particularly as it relates to marginalized communities. Um, this type of work that we're talking about now, this idea of how do we do hard work, basically, and survive it? And how do we also grow in our understanding of what is possible now in this era in which we are living? I've been reflecting quite a bit about the state of our nation and democracy itself, actually. Next year will be the 250th anniversary of this experiment that we call America. And its fragility is definitely showing clearly. I graduated from high school in 1976. And it's kind of interesting because when I see the six now, I'm reminded of the fact that I was a senior in high school in 76. And that was our 200th anniversary. And I remembered it was such a special time to graduate because I'm like, oh my God, it is 200 years of America. And I'm going to college and life is getting ready to start. And it was a time when, as a college student, I actually could be excited. It is sad to hear many of the college students today speaking as they are burdened with, excessive debt in terms of student debt, as they are facing a world where there are shrinking opportunities for them, um, and an administration that isn't leaning into the added support. It's a lot going on, but it was very different in 1976. We had a lot of hopes, we had dreams, and it seemed like there was really nothing we could not do. My classmates, in terms of me being at the kind of end of the baby boom, I didn't have classmates that were drafted into the Vietnam War. I did not have classmates who died from gunshot violence. Now, you might get stabbed. I was raised in Newark and East Orange. It might be a knife wound or two, but it wasn't people dying from gunshot wounds. And definitely there were not people when I was in high school dying from AIDS. We didn't even know of AIDS as something that even potentially could impact us. Um, we were just after Vietnam and just before AIDS hit the Black community. The things we had to worry about were things that was very simple. We just could not get pregnant. Okay. I wasn't always a lesbian. We couldn't get pregnant. Okay. And that was our focus. But we weren't thinking about things like a disease that could take our life. Anything that might have impacted us in that way could pretty much be dealt with a shot of penicillin if that was needed. But then it was this stepping into this other world, a world that none of us could have any idea for what was heading toward us. By the time I graduated from college in 1980, this thing that we thought was outside of the Black community, and definitely most of us were feeling like this was something that specifically was for gay white men. And in no way did we feel like any of us who were cisgender or who were straight would have to ever worry about this thing called HIV in particular and AIDS ultimately. What we did not understand fully was that this is not specific to any one group or class of people. This is a virus who could care less about the body it lands in, and even more less about its pathways into that body. But it took years for us to grow in our understanding of that. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. But the bottom line is that when HIV and AIDS hit the Black community, we were totally ill prepared on many, many levels. There were then, as now, many other contributing factors to the high mortality rates among Black gay men in particular, because I'm going to center that because that's what I was most connected to. Things like poverty, racial disparities in healthcare. But the bigger piece really was us as faith people. It was the communities of faith that ushered in something that as Black folk, we had never experienced before. We had never experienced a scenario where the church would ever deny anyone access to support, prayer, and care. But this particular epidemic was one that put the church in a bit of a quandary. The quandary was, if I support these people that have this disease that none of us understand anywhere, that we know is not there's not a cure for it, but if this is God's judgment against these people because of their gay lifestyle, then is it for us to intervene or to get involved, or is that God's business? And if it's God's business, then am I not supposed to in turn support the fact that this person did something that is so egregious that God says, I'm not only going to let you die, but I'm going to let you die a horrific death? One of the things about HIV and AIDS today, when we see so many young people, when we think about PrEP and varied other things, those things were not available in the 80s. If you got HIV, you were going to die. And the death would not be an easy one. It took time. It destroyed body parts. It destroyed families. And it separated people from the church. One of the bigger things it did also was it separated people from their families. There was rarely a time, let me tell you something, Bubba could go and shoot somebody, okay? And the church would embrace that person and say, you know what? I know he shot that man, and I know it was no reason for him to shoot that man. However, we still have to love him. And we're going to visit him in jail, and we're going to send care packages, and we're going to send prayers, and we're going to encourage him because, you know, he's one of ours. But when we started finding our choir directors, our preachers, our members getting colds and not getting better, and these varied other things that would come, and then sores all over your body, and wasting, where they would lose excessive amounts of weight. Most of our young people know nothing of that today because, you know, for the most part, this is now considered a chronic illness and not death. However, at that time, it was something that challenged us in very fundamental ways as it relates to how we deal with those that are other. And I want to suggest not just other, but also othered, as in the ED part, about how we make people others. My message today centers um, an energy that I want to suggest is being ushered in and called for now in this time in which we're living, as we think about how do we address this issue and understanding that it still is an issue. There are many who want to suggest that HIV is behind us. We have no cure for this. So it is still very much something that we are dealing with, and something that still does affect people, affect families, and yes, still affects the church. When I think about these divine manifestations of God in the way that God can show up for us, it is the feminine that is called forth now, the feminine ways that we can manifest the divine, and that as feminine individuals, and when I'm talking about this, yes, I'm speaking somewhat gendered. A part of my talk will be about gender, but the other part has to do with energy and not with genitalia. But you see, when we're thinking about feminine and masculine energy, we all hold both. And the question is, which one should be leading at any given point in time? I use single parents as an example of this. I have seen some men that are far better maternal figures than their female counterpart might be. There is something about this man that is nurturing, that is caring in a certain kind of way, totally heterosexual male, but he has these feminine attributes that at that time of the child's development is important to lead. I think about single parents as well. If I think about those who talk about single mothers, for example, and the fact that there are men who feel that they're walking so much in their masculine energy. Well, what they're doing is taking care of their family, okay? And in that scenario, if it means I have to work and I have to walk in a certain kind of way to make sure my family is okay, then I'm going to do that. And that needs to lead right now. We're in a season where those feminine attributes are definitely going to be essential if we are considering how we not only do the work, but survive the work of care for those infected and affected by HIV and AIDS. The gift given freely, as we think about God, understanding that God is not just some masculine energy. God is male and female. God is both womb and seed. In the beginning was God, right? And as God manifested, that God, the word tells us, came into chaos, stepped into a chaotic scenario. And it talks about God actually hovering over this chaos, hovering over earth. That word, when you translate it from the origin, is saying it is God hovering actually in the feminine in a way that a mother hen would hover over her egg. This notion of moving, and in the process of moving, shaping, and framing, not punching, not pulling, not forcing, but molding, shaping. And that kind of energy is what ultimately yielded the beauty, not only of our earth, but also of humanity and all of creation. I want to suggest that as we move forward in the fight against HIV and AIDS and STDs, that we would be served well to consider the ways that we've survived in the past and the possibilities for our collective future. I want to suggest that it is time for us to unapologetically start fighting like girls. In 2000, I was commissioned, as Reverend Valerie referenced, to open Unity Fellowship Church Movement's first church in the Bible Belt of the South. I relocated from Washington, D.C. to Charlotte with my then fiance and later partner and wife of 25 years, Gwendolyn, to open a primarily Black affirming congregation. We grew very fast and had LGBTQ members of the region coming to worship with us, in some instances, driving as much as 3 or 4 hours each way, twice a week for Sunday service and Bible study, just to have a safe place to worship. That hunger, that call, and whatever it was that they received there was worth that kind of sacrifice. And I want to suggest that part of what was the secret sauce there was they got welcome into family, into a community that held them and did not judge them in those ways that happened in so many other environments. When thinking about this and our growth, it also enabled them to have a space to actually bring their families. We I was so funny. I used to joke with some of the lesbians that were here in North Carolina because they weren't having like one kid, two kids. It was like families of 4 and 5. I said, y'all are not real lesbians. You can't be real. How y'all having all these kids? Right? And they had children because they were vested in family, as many were in this area. And as such, the challenge for them, if they were same gender loving families, was where can I safely bring my whole family to worship? And Unity Fellowship Church Charlotte was one of those places the whole family could come, and in some instances, for the very first time. The denomination that I was a part of at that time was birthed actually in the 1980s in response to the AIDS crisis. There were very few clergy at that time who, when individuals got sick, would actually go into hospitals and literally pray without looking like they were astronauts, covered from head to toe in plastic and gloves and all of this kind of stuff, because of fear for what might happen if they walked into even the room of someone with HIV or AIDS, and definitely would never touch them skin to skin, for sure not. There were among that group this young queer preacher and singer, Carl Bean. He wasn't even a pastor at that time. And he felt the call of God as he saw more and more of his friends, family, community succumbing to this disease that, again, as I said at that time, was a horrific, ugly death. And he would just show up at hospitals and he would pray with people and he would come in regular clothes and he would actually hold the hand of somebody who might have been dying. They might have had another day or two. And to find that the pastor that they had served as the choir director for all their life, or the church their family had been in for generations, were not the ones that showed up for them. And the pain they felt in reference to that, he was a salve in those ways that he showed up for them. But the bigger thing that happened in reference to that was the women in these individuals' lives, mama and them, auntie and them, grandmama and them. Those women, they could care less how their baby got sick. At the end of the day, they were the ones who made sure, whenever possible, that they could be there. So when that loved one passed, he was also one of the few who would actually do a service and not send everybody else in the room to hell by using that as an opportunity in the midst of all of that pain and all of that struggle to dare suggest that there was something about these individuals in terms of the way that they loved that made them unacceptable to God, God's self. And there'll be many prices to pay for that. Unfortunately, there were so many who never got to live to hear what was referenced in my introduction, and that was me going to a church for the first time and hearing God, gay, and good as a same gender loving woman. To see him in those services and be able to have a place where someone could have their loved one with honor, with dignity, with hope for those left behind was a gift. And so there were those after those services who would ask the question, well, tell us where your church is. He had no church. And so it literally started in his living room. Now, this is a man who definitely identified, and maybe in another time might have identified as trans, but definitely identified as feminine in those ways that the feminine manifestations came out for him as a femme queen. One of the things we saw with that, though, was that grew because the need grew. He saw not only would mama and them come, but then there were other queer folk who came because they heard that there was somebody who suggested that when I get sick, I can still be safe. That ultimately led to the birth of our denomination, the Unity Fellowship Church movement, and churches throughout the nation, primarily in urban settings, that provided that care and support that was so desperately needed for so many Black queer men in particular. One of the things that many of those congregations did was they also did center programs around HIV and AIDS. One of the things that I also learned in reference to that was how important it was to think about systems of support. In addition to Archbishop Bean, there were women. When I think about Los Angeles, I was living in LA at that time. But when thinking about what Los Angeles was like at that time, some of you all may remember hearing about the club Catch One, the Catch. God bless the Catch. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Many a wonderful time there. But in addition to being a great party place during the 80s, actually, it turned into a triage space. It turned into a space where uh, Jewel and others who owned properties like some of these in DC and in LA and other areas opened up their clubs to be able to offer food to those who were sick, who went and were the ones who would go to doctor appointments, who went and would make sure that somebody got a birthday cake when it was their birthday and there was nobody else to be around for them. They literally carried a community on their backs with limited resources themselves, but made sure that our brothers were okay because they were leaving us so fast. It was the women, it was the feminine in terms of the ways that that manifested to feed them, to clothe them, to wash them, to care for them. Their support was invaluable. And most of these women were same gender loving sisters who saw our brothers and knew that as their families left them, as the churches betrayed them, that no, it wasn't a preacher, it was a club owner. It was somebody that they might have smoked weed with 3 months before they got sick. That was the ones who came and helped. When I arrived in Charlotte, it was a city where 1 in 3 young gay men between the ages of 18 and 24 were HIV positive, and no one was talking about it. The silence was deafening. When I heard those numbers, I could not believe I was like, wait a minute, you're saying 1 in 3, 1 in 3? They said, yeah, it's 1 in 3 are HIV positive. I said, well, where's the work being done around them? Again, remember, I'm from northern New Jersey, and there was a lot of active work there around HIV and AIDS. I lived in LA, lots of work there. I was in DC, lots of work there. And then I come to Charlotte, and it was crickets. And I was devastated. I didn't understand. And so I started talking to my own brothers here and said, well, these numbers are crazy. Did you all know these numbers? And they said, yeah, we do. And I said, well, why aren't we talking about that in our congregation? He said, because we don't want to talk about it. We don't like talking about it. And I understood that it was a group of people who had been told, number one, God didn't accept and love them. Number two, I might have this virus that means my whole life is now affected, and varied other things, and they chose to just live. I talked to clergy and I said, well, what are we doing about this? And when you heard about the Charlotte Clergy Coalition for Justice, part of that was an outgrowth of work we did around HIV and AIDS and wellness and health. How do we as clergy educate ourselves so that we can be more effective support for our members who are clearly greatly impacted by this? The first thing we had to get past was them knowing it was okay for us to do that work. And so we did a lot of work. It was a lot of education, a lot of leaning in, a lot of honest talk, private talk. You heard reference the Do No Harm campaign, and that was one of the things that I don't know was referenced, but I'm a founder also of an organization here in Charlotte called the Freedom Center for Social Justice, and our work is anchored in the South, but it's national in its scope. And part of what we saw was challenges around clergy who wanted to do better, but did not have safe spaces to do that work. So what we had to begin doing was basically in more sequestered, quiet ways, host gatherings where we could talk to pastors in particular and other clergy, senior clergy in particular, to educate around HIV and AIDS. There were other organizations in our city that helped with that. One big one was the Regional AIDS Interfaith Network, again, led by a lesbian woman who uh, understood that if we don't find these ways of making sure that we also, in addition to white gay men, also find ways of supporting our people of color communities, then what kind of work are we really doing? And they helped to fund some of those initial gatherings. The power of that was absolutely amazing because, in addition to educating us, they also enabled us to build relationships. So, in a very short period of time, I was able to get a sense of like what clergy might be open or interested in this. And that ultimately grew to us doing a body of work where they were able to say, even though I don't agree that God, accepts homosexuality, what I also have to own is I don't have a right to cause harm. I don't get to cause harm because of my beliefs. And especially when they could hear things like the number of queer folk who had attempted and were successful in attempting suicide in other instances, to hear that the likelihood of queer children killing themselves in North Carolina was 3 times higher than that of their cisgender straight classmates. That when they started hearing the numbers, when they started hearing the concerns, primarily in many instances from female or feminine voices, then we were able to break through and at least get them to say, I agree, I can't cause harm. And that led to major work that ultimately landed us in the NAACP with their first LGBTQ committee. And they put that committee on the executive board. And I had the honor of actually chairing that first group. All kind of things are possible. If we understand the power of God's feminine energy, it took girl power to get us to many of the places that we are. My first funeral, you all, was for a gay member of my society, of my community, my congregation. He was an amazing young man, artistic, beautiful in every way, and a heart that was magnanimous. He was HIV positive. It ultimately led to full blown AIDS. And I remember toward the end, he was too weak to really do much for himself. And I'd come over for a visit and realized he had not been washed in a while, in a couple of days. Hadn't been a long time, but um, he was uncomfortable because many things happened to their bodies and stuff. And I gave him a shower. And I remembered in that moment, I get emotional still when I think about it, and that was almost 20 years ago. But I remembered him in the shower. And I remembered this body that at this point was literally skin and bones. This man that used to dance and sing and was vibrant. And to see him in that state, to wash him, to lotion his body, to help clothe him. Another brother had come over so that we could help with all the other things we had to do. But I thought about the fact that in that moment, he didn't need a medical report. He didn't need another meal. He needed a mother's touch, a feminine hug, a loving rub on his body. And in that moment, I knew that was the gift I had to bring. For you see, yes, I was his pastor. I was also his sister, though. And in that moment, I was also a mother figure holding him. I thought about the beauty of his life. For you see, when I looked at this frail body, I understood that what I was looking at was also still beauty. It was beauty in the way that he was ready to release and to be present with God in those ways that his spirit would release and manifest before God. But beyond that, it was about the peace he felt, if for but a moment, because of the ways we showed up. So when we think about those ways we can support people, sometimes folk are looking for the big thing. Other times, y'all, it's just a matter of you going over and putting some Vaseline on some cracked up feet. Sometimes it is about bringing over something that smells sweet and putting that on a body. And sometimes it means getting over yourself and being willing to dare sacrifice for one as others sacrificed for you. And looking at the state of affairs in our nation today, it is impossible to not think about how our most marginalized will be cared for in the coming months and years. As so many of the social safety nets are removed or greatly damaged, more people will fall through the cracks. Part of the answer to address this is that more of us need to start fighting like and appreciating the power of feminine engagement. Helen Andrews wrote a recent article in the Compact titled The Great Feminization. She commented on an essay by the author, and this is a pseudonym, but Jay Stone. In it, he identifies the canceling of the president of Harvard University, or him having to resign in 2019. He is suggested that women in this scenario were the ones who made that happen, who caused this Harvard University president to have to leave his post. He had to leave the post after he suggested that women were not able to engage in the highest levels of the hard sciences because of our brain capacity and how we're wired. So Stone saw that the response to this was a tipping point toward feminine power. Quote, this cancellation was feminine because all cancellations are feminine, according to him. Cancel culture is simply what women do whenever there are enough of them in a given organization or field. That is the great feminization thesis, which the same author later elaborated upon at book length. Everything you think of as wokeness, according to these authors, is simply an epiphenomenon of demographic feminization, according to them. When thinking of the changes in our nation today, they are being done under the backdrop of a nation that has more women in leadership now and leadership roles than we ever have in the history of this baby nation of ours. In 2016, law schools tipped. So now the majority of law students are female students. And in 2023, the number of associates in law firms also tipped. The majority of associates in law firms since 2023 are female. Judges grew to 33% of the bench. And I want to note to his credit, 64% of that number was put in under Biden. In 2019, medical schools did the tip, where now there are more female medical students than male students. And in 2023, college instructors tipped. So now the majority of those instructing our children and students at all levels are actually female. Wokeness rose wherever women had a majority. So, what is ours to do with this moment that is calling forth this feminization? I want to suggest, as I'm winding here, a collective push is needed. The collective push I'm talking about is not just a regular push where I'm pushing as an individual. This collective push is one that I would like to liken more to the push of a woman giving labor, a push that one gives during birth. When we think about this and we think about the ways that HIV and AIDS is very much still present, very much still impacting negatively so many of our communities. And I want to suggest that we also want to look at some of the fastest growing numbers of new cases. And you all guess who it is? Women my age. Those of us who weren't raised in the HIV era, those of us who barely understood what a condom was, right? Because we were using varied other things. And now stepping out into a world where, 67 don't look like 67 used to look before, right? 80 don't look like 80 used to look. We've got energy, we've got strength, we've got all of these things. And men have Viagra, right? So there are so many things that are enabling us to be sexual so much longer in our life. And as such, who teaches mama and them about how to be safe in sex, right? So those numbers are growing. So the need really very much is there. And this is not anymore just a gay disease. This is a disease, a virus that affects the overall community in which we live. So this collective push, I want to suggest, must be one that understands the push at this point in time is one that is going to sometime be bloody. It's going to sometime be messy. It's going to hurt sometime when we see the injustices and the like. But I want to say we need to keep on pushing. And when we push collectively, understanding that while there may have been a book written back in the early 1900s, The Birth of a Nation, I guess that was 19 something, 1905, 1910, The Birth of a Nation, I want to suggest that the actual more accurate title should have been where we are now, and that is The Birthing of a Nation. We're not fully birthed yet. We are grappling with what it looks like as we come through this experiment. And as such, who knows better how to birth than the feminine energy? We understand that everything isn't comfortable. We understand that sometimes I've got to sit in the midst of that labor pain. Sometimes I've got to hold back, and sometimes I've got to push forward. That rhythm of birth, that rhythm of care, that rhythm of support after the birth becomes so important if we consider that a model for how we move forward as a nation. We must counter these ways that America is seeking to abort some of the best of who we are when we hear things like 300,000 Black women removed from the government roles, when now actually Black women are the most educated population of people in our entire country. When you think about the fact that there are now professions being considered not professional. Well, what are those professions not seeming professional anymore? All of the ones that primarily have women in them. Therapists, nurses. How is a nurse not professional, right? Teachers, these areas that have been dominated by or are growing in feminization, as some view it, are the ones that are under attack. Well, when we understand that, we can understand that what we've got is something special, because folk don't attack stuff that aren't effective. Folk don't come for things that aren't having impact. And so what we can own is that we are on a right track when we think about leaning into feminine attributes, leaning into those things that discuss the ways we can live and live more abundantly. For those who need a little Jesus, I want to say that if you ever wanted to see a feminized character in the Bible, look at Jesus. Well, what do you mean, preacher? Well, what I'm talking about is the fact that if you look at how Jesus showed up, they wanted Jesus to come in on a big steed. They were expecting the Savior to come on a big horse and come on in with all the regalia and vestments and all of this kind of stuff. Jesus came in his play clothes, his day clothes, on a donkey, okay? And just waved as he went along and spreading love and spreading joy and saying to them, this is how we do this. This is how we win. And in Matthew 25:31, he talks about what he wanted us to center the most, right? And the word in Matthew 25:31 says, when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the angels with him, he will sit on his glorious throne. All the nations will be gathered before him, and he will separate the people one from another as shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. He will put the sheep on his right and the goats on his left. Jesus went on to say that then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom God prepared for you since the creation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me." And I want to suggest he would say, "I was picked up by ICE, and you came and rescued me." Then the righteous will answer him, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothing and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you?" The king, Jesus said, will reply, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me." Fighting like a girl is not rocket science, y'all. Caring for ourselves when fighting for others requires collective effort. So when one gets tired, the next can tap in. We have been here before, and we have been here before. We've done this. We know how to do this. We know how to care for our communities. What I hope is that we will learn how to do it in a way, though, that does not take so much from the feminine, that enables us to understand that no, we will likely not get rewarded for how we work. There is a song that I love where they talk about the fact that no, they're not going to like the way that we do our sermons or write our words. We're not going to get rewarded for that. But we will get rewarded for it by God and the people is effectiveness, effective care, love, compassion, empathy, collective care, and a central focus not on the 1%, but on the 99% are the things taught in most faith traditions and the things we must lean into. Don't believe the hype. Let me tell you something. If you've ever seen girls fight, and don't let us do a for real fight with the Vaseline on the face, the hair pulled up and back. And I'm from New York, so you know that sometimes stuff be in the hair. I'm not going there, but you know what I'm talking about. You don't ever want to fight a girl, right? We want to be bold like that now. I think that is what's being called forth. And I pray that we celebrate not only the feminine in ourselves, but the feminine in the divine and pull that down unapologetically. So now all I have to say to all of us here is let's push. God bless.
Wow. We thank God for you, Bishop, and for you imploring us to continue to embrace love,
Yes.
compassion, that collective empathy, and keep fighting like girls. My name is Dion Boissier, and I am proud board chair of Women Preach. This topic of HIV and AIDS, and those of us who have become advocates. I am a 70s baby and went to high school in the early 80s. And I lost one of my best friends. He was a hemophiliac, and his blood transfusions, he was not able to get the care, and the kinds of medications you mentioned, Bishop, was not even available at that time. And he died of a little disease, a big disease with a little name, as Prince said in his song. And we didn't understand at the time. Now we know that this is not over, and the stigma of those living with HIV is still very much there. In light of recent attacks on the existence of prophetic preaching and those of us who are speaking truth in the season where lies become truth. Woman Preach is so critical and important. We just celebrated 15 years of doing this work. And we are existing in a time when more than ever we need us. That community that you spoke of exists in the Woman Preach Nation. The family that you talked about, Bishop, is here with Women Preach. And we seek funding around the increase of education and awareness and the safety of those who are preaching this kind of gospel. And it is needed now to be supported more than ever before. When our voices change, our lives shift. I remember being in community with Women Preach. And as you talked about AIDS separating people from families and from church, when I no longer saw myself welcomed, when we don't hear about those with different abilities, visible or invisible abilities, when we do not hear about those of different ages and different expressions of humanity being preached about, Woman Preach makes sure that there is a space where we are trained to be able to embrace that kind of liberative preaching, where you can hear Bishop God, gay, and a good in the same sentence, where we help preachers craft sermons inspired by poetry and artistic expression and never exclude those whom society may often exclude. So we want to keep fighting the good fight of faith for another 15 plus years. We want to continue continue producing the networks of preachers who will use their voices in service of a gospel that relates to that feminine energy, as you mentioned, Bishop, that embraces womanist and feminist concerns of equity and justice for the sake of all of our liberation and freedom. So, with a gift that you give to us, not just because that it falls on a Giving Tuesday, but because Woman Preach Nation, our our alumni network grows and extends wide, and because we want to keep fighting this good fight. We want to keep continuing to produce preaching intensives and the digital wisdom conversations just like this one. Continue writing segments and making sure that that community of love, compassion, collective empathy continues to grow, and we continue to fight like girls. So join us and the Woman Preach Nation. Join us as we continue this critical work, and make sure to log on to womanpreach.org/give today. And we will make sure that we continue to do as you have implored us with prophetic voices and holy imagination and a community that loves you and us and cares for us as we do this work and keep fighting like girls. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Bossier, for inviting people to give. The link is here and in the chat. I do want to encourage you to give. It's Giving Tuesday. We didn't plan that. This is also the time we wanted to have this conversation. Is Nancy Kingwood still here with us? And Tierney, is there any way? I know this is putting her on the spot if she's still here. Is there any way to bring Nancy into the studio? Nancy, are you still with us? Okay, so while we try to find out if Nancy is here, part of why I'm asking about Nancy Bishop is because she does this work up in Connecticut, and mostly with churches and with cishet people. One of the things that I have been trying to be real clear with people about is that um, this this work is not just um, about queer people. Well, you mentioned this, but I want to be real clear because I think when you started by saying the church couldn't figure out whether it was going to love people who were dying
Yes.
from AIDS, because people who were being affected and infected by the disease HIV were mostly in the beginning that we knew of gay men.
Yes.
We actually don't know that that's true. We just know that that's the community that where that seemed devastated almost immediately, right? And part of when we started this conversation, when we started the conversation about how we're gonna talk about this year, is I really wanted what you did, which was to give us another way to think about doing this work. When you
Yeah.
said fight like a girl, one of the things that I think preachers do, particularly sister preachers, and I'm trying not to do the binary, but
Mhm.
uh, is take on way too much work
Yeah.
and
Absolutely.
don't know the art of rest in the work. Can you talk about that as well?
Yeah. Um, a, a lot of it is gendered, I want to suggest, and generational. Our generation, we're contemporaries. We're not rewarded for walking like girls, talking like you don't get rewarded for that. We're expected to do certain things. You're not rewarded for it. You're expected to be the last one to leave. You're expected to be the one that prepares the meal. You're expected to be the one that sucks it up and that giggles at the misogynistic statement because you're in the room and you're the only one in the room because we were many of those first, right? We were those first coming along, first bishops, first professors, in some areas and all of this kind of stuff. As the first, though, the thing that uh, becomes kind of challenging around that is we were led to believe if we were to succeed, we had to kind of do most of it on our own because we didn't have a lot of mentors. I remember when I was being consecrated as a bishop, I didn't know what a girl bishop was. I didn't know how to do girl bishop. I knew bishop. I knew the role, right? I knew because my last three pastors have been bishops. However, when it came time for me to senior pastor and then to also be bishop, I knew that needed to look different because I'm a girl. And when I say I'm a girl, I'm not saying that in any way that diminishes who I am. I'm saying I embraced my womanhood and I understood that there was a gift of my womanhood to this role. I did not know what that gift was yet because I had not seen it modeled for me yet. But what I did have was other sisters who were bishops and had just gotten in. So I had Bishop Yvette Flunder that I talked to. I had Bishop Nancy Wilson, who was head of the MCC Church. I had Bishop Vashti McKenzie, one of my sorors, who I was able to touch. I had these women who were, again, remember you all, first stage bishops. So they were also figuring their stuff out, right? And in terms of Bishop Flunder and I, we were Church of God in Christ kids. And so as a Church of God in Christ child, I almost freaked out when somebody called me preacher the first time because I had never been given permission to preach. I could talk, I could speak, and I couldn't do that from the pulpit, as many of y'all know, right? And
Right.
for those who know our background. And so when you then take that person, fast forward her to reverend, then fast forward her to pastor, then fast forward her to elder, bishop, and all the stuff, right? that it's impossible for me to think I've let all of that go. You don't let it all go. What my biggest hope is that we own the fact for the baby boomers that our job is not to do this work. Our job is to support those who will now carry it forward, because we've got too much of the other stuff. I will not be able, unless God lets me live another however many years, like 500 years, I'm not going to be decolonized before. My mind will not be decolonized by the time I'm kind of finished my body of work.
I mean,
So
we're
if
trying, but
I'm
I
sure
hear
you
you.
understand what I'm saying. And I'm, because, again, this is a few minutes, it's real talk. Real talk is we will not be decolonized who are baby boomers. It's not going to happen before we're able to move along. What we can do, however, is own our minds and our processes are a bit colonized still. We are trying to imagine and reimagine how we do this. So what do we have to bring? What we have to bring as women, number one, um, any woman I'm mentoring or any feminine energy that I am mentoring, I tell them all, don't you dare do it like I did it. I know what you saw the fruit, but you don't know the price. And the price I paid, if I could go back and talk to my younger self, but I couldn't, because we'll be able to tell them the stories of what we had to endure, what we had to go through, what we had to suck up in order to get to where we are. And then what is ours uniquely to do now as we're supporting their broad thinking, their less colonized thinking. Now, what that's going to mean, though, is because I do get concerned about our intergenerational stuff, because the younger people feel that we don't get it and aren't ready to move out of the way, because some of us do need to move the heck out the way. That's part of the problem in some instances. And in other instances, it is about young people also understanding that we got something to say. We don't live something. We've lived some lives now. We got, and we are typically more resourced than they are. So the key is, how do we bring these together? That's going to be the gift. And I want to suggest nobody does it better than the feminine. They just don't, because we're hardwired for it. And when I'm saying hardwired, and I'm using this word feminine, I'm using it incredibly broadly. Um, I am fully in touch with my feminine energy. I love who I am as a woman. I love all my parts. I do. And I also have a fair amount of masculine energy that definitely my partner is enjoying now, in the ways that shows up. But it's not always there. It's not always leading. But I understand that give and take. When I say my masculine energy, that has nothing to do with me saying that I want to be a man. It has to do with the fact that from time to time, I'm owning that ebb and flow of everyone, all of us. Now, I want to suggest, though, is to lean into the feminine. And the feminine is a different kind of rhythm, and one that is not consistent with the way the church functions, nor is it consistent with the way America is heading.
So
America,
let me tell
yeah.
you what I hear you saying.
Hmm.
Though the church is full of women, and here I mean DNA
Yes.
women,
Yes. Hmm.
80% by
Yes.
all
Yes.
notions.
Hmm.
The church,
Hmm.
even with all those female bodies in it,
Doesn't matter.
still
Mhm.
functions as patriarchal
Yes.
place,
Yes.
which makes it. So since we're talking about HIV/AIDS, when we start talking about, you said this before we came on into the studio, when we
Hmm.
start talking about preaching around taking care of people, loving
Yes.
folks, doing no
Yes.
harm, that
Hmm.
this alone, forget your theology, do no
Hmm.
harm from the pulpit with your mouth or from the way you don't receive people. I was really
Yes.
moved by you saying we will accept the murderer and then expect people who have been um, who has HIV and or full blown AIDS
Yeah.
to be abandoned by the church.
Mhm.
That just struck me a
Yeah.
particular way.
And
I
most of them
really
have served the church the whole
say
time, their
what?
whole life. Most of them that we're talking about have served the church.
Oh, right,
Most of
exactly.
them,
That's my point. We're not
yeah,
talking about street urchins.
yeah,
I know that's a pejorative term, and I don't mean it in that way. We're talking about people who grew up
yes,
literally under the pulpit or
yes,
in. in the fellowship hall, in the youth ministry, and all of that. Thank you for letting me hijack the rest of your evening, Reverend Nancy. I wanted y'all to meet each other in person because I could hear your brain in my
Mhm.
mind as Bishop was talking. Like, this is really true. I was like, "Ooh, I know Nancy is her mind is just going like this."
Thank you so much. I don't mind.
So, if you don't mind, can you give some feedback to what you heard Bishop say and any questions you might have? And then, Bishop, what I want to say, Nancy, tell me the name of your group. I always forget. But the work she has been doing specifically in Connecticut, Bridgeport, and really the state and beyond is helping bridge the space between kind of what you were talking about, between activists and church folk to
Oh,
care.
yeah.
Okay, go
Yes.
y'all.
Yes, well, it's nice meeting you, Bishop, and
Nice meeting you too,
Valerie.
Nancy.
Anything for you and Reverend Dion. I am currently in Washington for a conference because there's so many new executive orders coming out, and when we talk about HIV, and we understand it to also be a social justice issue and concern for those that are living with HIV and their families that are affected. And so GBAP, I'm the executive director of the Greater Bridgeport Area Prevention Program, and I've worked in HIV about 33 years. Um, and so I've seen the ebbs and flows with different administrations and different policies and different ideologies and things like that. I've been working with the Black Church for about 22, 23 years,
Yeah.
specifically to help equip clergy
Yeah.
and laity around and educate around how to engage not just their congregation, but the community.
Community.
And
Mhm.
so there is that intersectionality, I think, for people of faith when it comes to our theological understanding, because it's almost like a theological mandate, if you will, that if we are true disciples walking in the footsteps of Christ, right, and sitting among the people, what then do we say?
Yes.
And what I'm in my experience, what I have learned is some clergy are not equipped.
Yep.
Uh, and that's not saying anything negative. It's just
Mhm.
saying that the activists and the educators, we still have work to do on the ground.
Yes.
And we know policy shapes and drives funding.
Yes.
So we are at a critical point right now where all of this federal funding is at jeopardy. It's at risk. And um, how beautiful would it be for the church, for clergy to stand up at this hour?
Yeah.
This is the time that we really need to speak for
Mhm.
God and
Yes.
allow God to work through us.
So, Bishop Rawls, in light of what Nancy said, don't go anywhere, Nancy.
Okay.
Talk about the Black Mountain Theology Project. That's not what
Yes.
the name of it.
Yeah.
Theology Center, because
Yes.
I see a kindred
Mhm.
between what you are doing there and what Nancy is trying
Absolutely.
doing in Greater Bridgeport about helping
Yes.
preachers know how to preach. And I
Mhm.
keep saying in a time of compassion fatigue, partly
Mhm.
because I feel like we have this onslaught of so much is going on all the
Mhm.
time that people are like, I'm just not going to say anything except Jesus saves. I'm just not going to
Mhm.
preach anything else. And I just don't even want to think theologically about
Yeah.
these things. So y'all
Yeah.
talk about that.
Reverend Nancy, I am part of a team that is launching an experimental seminary experience called the Black Mountain School of Theology and Community. Our work actually started with a Lilly grant around their Thriving Congregations work, and I'm sure you're
Mhm,
probably familiar with some of
mhm.
that work with them. That went to actually another entity because we needed a fiscal sponsor, so it was with the Montreat Conference Center, which kind of centers Presbyterian faith. Um, So the first 2 years we did that and really leaned into the work of thriving congregations where we were able to go in and do that work. My focus was more intersectionality because that's a lot of what my nonprofit does, and the work that I do is very intersectional. The question then became, well, what might our next be? And one of the things that I was talking about, it's as the Black Mountain School of Theology and Community, is that the goal is to consider community activists also as scholars because they are. And
Mm-hmm.
increasingly, with so much of what you were just referencing, Reverend Nancy, happening in Washington and the like, this is going to be even more important that
Mm-hmm.
we validate what communities have learned, what they have been successful at. As I mentioned to you, what happened in the 1980s, right, where club owners and others, right, it's going to take some of that kind of creative, out of the box thinking, but we've done it before. That's the whole point is, part of why they don't want to teach history, and part of why, when you think about the slave Bible, it was certain things they did not want us to learn, and definitely some things they don't want us to remember, right?
Yeah.
But what we know is, when you think about the griots, part of their job was to bring the story forward,
Mm-hmm.
bring the power of that story forward also, right? So when we think about the fact that we're validating community scholars and preparing theological students
Yeah.
differently for the world they're going to step into. And the goal of that being, again, if we think about feminization of things, it is more communal, what I'm talking
Mm-hmm.
about, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
we expect the theological student to know how to work with their community when they get out of school. Who the heck teaches them how to do that, though?
Right. Right.
Especially complex as communities are. And then we expect the community activists to respect the church that many of us don't respect. Okay. So how do you balance that? We balance it through relationships. You balance it by teaching them together. You balance it by validating what each one brings to the table. And that is what we are leveraging now. And so I'm very excited about the launch of a new Charlotte campus that we're going to be doing at Union Presbyterian Seminary, actually, here in Charlotte. We're finalizing some details. That's a secret, so we can't talk about it loud yet. Okay, everybody. I'm telling y'all what to say. We're getting ready to do something in Charlotte. And the Charlotte campus is going to be focusing much more actually on this deep intersectional work, particularly with activists, but able
Mm-hmm.
to bring in speakers like Reverend Valerie Bridgman. Thank you. And yes, you're getting an invitation, and others who will come in. And so let me tell you the other thing that's happened with the school situation. Seminaries are too big to pivot fast, right? So there's also curriculum that we're now able to offer to their students that allow the seminaries to plug into something that until they're really able, or even if they want to, they really don't have to because the school is virtual, outside of two intensive that are in person through the year. But barring that, it's a way of them being able to add extra curriculum to their students without having to bring on more faculty. So we
Right.
can do a 6-week course, and we can do offer curriculum as we kind of mature and do other things. But I think when I talk about thinking like a girl, and fighting like a girl, the idea of fighting like a girl is something that is intentional language I'm using because of the fact that it has always been poo-pooed.
Mm-hmm.
That when a girl fights, it's no big thing. But let me
Mm-hmm.
tell you something. You know what the boys in high school did not want to do? Fight a girl. You know why
Mm.
they didn't want to fight a girl? They didn't want to fight a girl because we weren't going to stop until it was over. Okay?
Uh-huh.
Meant we were going to use whatever and whoever we had to. The other thing about fighting like a girl, if you remember this, some of you all, if a boy tried to fight me by myself, come on, somebody. If
Mm-hmm.
if a boy me by myself, yeah. Now y'all are gonna. What would have happened if a boy tried to fight me by myself and other sisters were anywhere around, even if they didn't like me?
Or
We're gonna
even
have
if they didn't know you.
see, don't get me going because what we inherently will do. Did you just hit her? You hit her?
Yeah.
It's some things that we say are unacceptable, and I
Mm-hmm.
think we don't say that enough today. That
Mm-hmm.
there is just some stuff that we need to say to this government. That
Yeah.
shit right there, that shit's unacceptable.
Mhm.
This over
Mhm.
that's and we
Mhm.
need to say it full-throated. And we need to also say it not being apologetic about leading with our stories,
Yes.
leading with emotion, being okay using real words, right? As opposed to the way we typically do, where we always want to try to make it softer, a little easier, a
Mhm.
little better. That's okay sometime. But I want to suggest, and I tend to be kind of more that person, right? Because again, my work is on the intersection.
Mhm.
But more and more, let me just say, as I'm getting more mature and older, it, it all gets said, okay? And it all gets
We have
said
no filters left.
because
It's only a year
you
in our.
know what I want to say. Yes.
I'm
but
gonna
I
I'm gonna
this
stop y'all because we have very little time for Q&A,
questions.
and
Yes.
I want the people to be able to get their questions in. One
Yes.
is from Priscilla that asked, how is all of what has happened in this administration, current administration, affected funds for 501(c)(3)s, community health programs who are trying to deal with people living with HIV and or AIDS, and how might we who are, this is my part, that's the first part, this is now my question, and how might we as preachers speak to that from the pulpit? So
It's been
either one
devastating.
of both of y'all.
Yeah. I would like to do a two-part because Rev, I know you're dealing with it more directly. My organization actually doesn't center HIV and AIDS. We do
Mhm.
the work. In fact, I was actually at a HIV/AIDS event, a luncheon just before I came here.
Okay.
But I want to suggest that it is devastating in ways none of us expected it would happen this fast. We knew something would happen, but just what's happening with this administration is criminal, to be quite honest. To pull funding from organizations that have been providing critical care with no sight of funds returning, to pull funding, particularly when thinking about the diaspora. We have been one of the larger funders of HIV/AIDS work in Africa and other parts of the world. To just pull the rug out from under these entities. And that reflects not only the people who are infected and affected, but also the workers, the whole spectrum. And it is by design to destroy and to tear down. So, yes, Priscilla, it has been devastating. And this again is why we must begin thinking now more creatively about, so how do we now fill that need and not kill ourselves in the process? And Nancy, I'm sure you have more direct information about that.
Well, so I agree with everything you said. It is devastating. And I think for us, the most challenging part is waiting for the other shoe to drop, because
Yeah.
we've already seen the executive orders,
Yep.
and the executive orders put restrictions on federal funding, who
Everything.
you can serve and how we can serve them.
Yep. Yep.
The Ryan White Care Act has not been voted on since 2009. It just kept getting caught up in the continuing resolution.
Yep.
And so at any given time, it can be pulled back. And so what I would like for clergy to know, and just, our churches to know, that we all heal in community. And
Mm.
when you start speaking to some of these things across the pulpit in the context of our preaching, not only are we lifting up the people, we're informing people, because a lot of people don't actually know how the executive orders are impacting the funding on local levels.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we have been the lead organization for Ryan White funding for over 20 years.
Wow.
And so this fiscal year, we are not the lead, but we still receive Ryan White Part A funding, which provides the ambulatory care, which provide transportation, emergency food assistance. We pay for people's utilities. We pay for, we address the social determinants of health to ensure that people have access to care. And now, and most of the people that we serve are on Medicaid,
Mm. Yeah.
which
Oh
was
Lord.
covered under the Affordable Care Act. And
Hmm.
so now, with that in limbo, right?
Yep.
even with FQHCs, with the health centers, billing for services, with mental health providers, billing for services, that may be pulled back.
Mm.
And so we just don't know how to navigate these waters. And, I can come on and talk a lot of high and lofty spiritual language. And
Mhm.
at the end of the day, what does that really mean?
Yeah.
I think people
Yeah.
need a word that we could hold on to
Mm.
yes, we have hope. Yes, we have faith, but we all need to be engaged and mobilized because we need to roll up our sleeves. We have our work cut out for us.
Mhm. Yeah.
And when people come into the sanctuary or even they're logging online on Sundays or whenever people are having services, that's what people are looking for. They're
Yeah.
looking for their hope to be affirmed, their humanity to be affirmed,
Mm.
because life is lifing right now.
Yeah.
I know personal friends of mine who are executive directors, they have closed their doors.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
smaller nonprofits that are on the front lines, that are
Yeah.
doing the work, that have earned long-standing respect from the community are going fading to the left
Mhm.
because of the lack of funding, because we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, because of the executive orders. And historically, it has been the United States government with
Right.
taxpayers' dollars that have been supporting these services, and they
Right.
should.
Mhm.
We just don't
and
know from
and
day to
they
day,
should.
and they
And they
should,
Yeah,
Mhm.
because
and they should.
back to, I'm always like, so how are the preachers supposed to be responding here? I think a lot of times, um people think, well, what, the church ain't doing this, and the church, it's like, most churches, something like 70% of all churches are 100 members or fewer.
Less. That's
Mhm,
right.
mhm.
100.
Actually, more accurate numbers around 50 to 25 for real, for
Right,
real.
right.
Mhm.
And most of the givers are in the lower
Economic.
percentile of
Mhm.
earnings. So
Yeah,
even if, and they often are, they tithe, somebody making $30,000 can only give 3,000 a year.
Mhm.
Like if
mhm,
you say just the basic tithe, but
10%.
most
Mhm.
people are doing more than that if we tell the whole truth about this.
Mhm.
mhm.
So I think some of it is for churches to be honest about what we are doing,
Yeah.
and also to be honest about our expectations from God. And let me
Yeah,
be real clear, our disappointments
Mm.
yeah,
Mm.
in our
Mm.
faithfulness.
yeah,
Mhm.
Habakkuk is one of my favorite prophets because he's like, how long are you going to look on evil, God?
That's right.
Like,
That's
yeah,
seriously,
right.
yeah.
Yeah.
like justice is perverted. Come on.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
I think it's giving people permission to both lament and to be frustrated
Yeah,
in their faith, even while we're giving them a word of hope. Because I do
Yes.
yeah,
think we have to give people a word of hope.
Yes.
Uh, I, I said today in my sermon in chapel, I love Advent for this reason, because we are pushed again and again to anticipate God's
yeah,
presence
Me.
in our,
Yeah. Mhm.
and it's easy to forget when the world is on fire and we have a government, and ours is not the only government, but when we have a government on the planet, um, literally setting the poor and dispossessed and most
Yeah.
vulnerable among us on fire.
Yeah. Can I say
Are you?
something too in reference to this kind of common care, particularly of female preachers? Um, I want to pose a challenge to us. Um, so few of us are really prepared for any big emergency in our lives financially.
yeah,
You don't mind if I mention something in reference to this, right? Okay. We It's okay to own that you have to be taken care of also financially. It's okay to say that. It's okay
mhm,
to own the need for a decent salary. it's okay to own if my congregation can't cover a salary for me and my family, then what does that look like? What needs to be put in place? And I fear that we get so accustomed to being the one that uses our money and trust that somebody's put tens of thousands of dollars in, right? We're the ones who use our money because it's got to survive. Nonprofit has to live. The church has to make it, so I won't get a salary, right? All of those kind of things. But at the end, I'm fortunate because I'm bivocational. But but should that matter? If one is doing that work, so I want to challenge us to not be so quick to give up our stuff, to
Mm.
not so reluctant to say the real number, right? I have male colleagues that are making $10,000 a talk. Do you hear what I'm saying?
Wow.
10,000. And if I ask for 500, somebody feels like it's a push, right? Well, where did you find the 10,000? And why pull me in under this program instead of under that program? Y'all understand what I'm saying, right?
I do.
And so some of it, to be honest, you all, is our fault.
Mm-hmm.
I can't fault people for negotiating better than me. But what I am suggesting is somebody also can benefit from us helping people knowing how to do that. So I want to ask that, when I think about women preach and varied other things, when we talk about leaning into the feminine, that we also encourage people to learn how to take care of themselves, also financially, that it is not a bad word, that it is okay for us to prosper in every good and perfect way. And I'm not talking about prosperity ministry. I'm saying that we have neglected ourselves in this area. And now many are retiring with nothing but hope.
Mm-hmm.
That Social Security will be there, with hope that the retirement money won't be blown because somebody mismanaged it, right? Like that Medicare will be there for us. None of that's guaranteed. And those are all the safety nets. So I just want to throw that out there, that as women, we stop being apologists about
Yes.
getting what we're worth.
That's a good point. That's a very good point, because I think on some level we have been socialized and conditioned to accept less.
Period.
Yeah. And
And I'm glad
sometimes
about it.
also connected to our self-worth, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Now I have to go lay my head down. Well, this conversation went different from how I expected it, but it's been a great conversation. No, really. And thank you, Reverend Kingwood, for letting me rope you into this conversation. I know that wasn't fair. So, Tierney, I know I have blown your budget, but uh, make it so. um, and I apologize for that. Not really. Um, but yeah, I mean, I think as we prepare to leave, we're out of time. Um, but making the kinds of decisions to care for ourselves while we care for the world so that we don't fall into compassion fatigue,
Yeah.
so that we don't quit fighting like girls, so that we don't give up the places where God is calling us. But I also think it means paying very close attention to where God is calling us. We're
Come on
about to
now.
go off.
Yes.
Last 15 seconds, Reverend Kingwood, and then close us out, Bishop Ross. What would you want to leave the people with?
Hmm. God is with us.
Mhm.
Amen.
And I have to every now and then remind myself of that.
Come on now.
Because sometimes it feels like I'm fighting alone,
Mhm.
and bring that home. But God is with us, and God is aware. God is aware. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bishop?
I would put on social media periodically, hold on to your joy.
Yes.
Hold on to your joy.
Yeah. Um, I two things come to mind. The first is every generation gets a thing.
Yes.
Every generation. Every generation gets a thing. I am a reflection of three things that have already passed. I am a descendant of slaves, and this descendant of slaves wound up being able to ascend.
Mm.
I am a woman. And when I think about Ida B. Wells and so many of the others who had to stand and fight so that as a woman, I could have a voice. I could vote. I could get land and property. But y'all know that that was recent, right? Like that's the 1900s, okay, and the early 2000s. And also, I am a preacher. And as a preacher, I have seen in my lifetime women be able to ascend to some of the highest levels of leadership within our work. So I'm also queer. Dr. Peter Gomes, in his book, The Good Book, called homosexuality the last prejudice. And I said he just didn't live long enough. He just didn't. Because he was like, we dealt with anti-Semitism, we dealt with the woman issue, and now we got the queers, and that's going to be the last one. When we do that, that's going to be it. And what I want to suggest is he just didn't live long enough. There's always going to be an out population. So this is no different. We win every time.
Mm-hmm.
The
And
thing
it
is,
becomes our responsibility to bring people in.
Yeah.
and that's the collective birthing process. That's
the
the
collective
collective
birthing.
push now, right?
So,
That push will be bloody, will be those things. So I want to let people know everything you need, you already have. You just may have to look at other places for it. You have everything you need right this second to do not just good stuff, but I mean amazing stuff. Because the truth of the matter is, when transitions like this happen, the greatest potential for opportunity also presents itself.
Yes.
Those two things are a fact. So be
okay,
encouraged.
we're out of time. We're out of time.
We have agency.
We know, because I promised the people that we were going to let them go, but I want y'all to stay because we have to get a picture of us.
I got it.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you to everyone who's joined us in this conversation. We're about to go away, but Reverend Boyce and Tierney, you are going to join us back on in the studio, right? And the rest of you, thank you so much for coming. I hope you will give to Woman Preach so we can continue to have these kinds of webinars and the work we do, and bless you as that God gives you rest so that you are not fatigued in this moment. Bye, everybody.